Well, we all know what happened after World War II. But here and what if the USSR, instead of creating individual satellite states across Eastern Europe, created a single unified entity? The European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or East Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or how we will be calling it E.U.S.S.R, and how this entity would have shaped the world and timeline from this point forward across various aspects. I hope you enjoy. The European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, an alternate history, a colossal communist state encompassing the Eastern Bloc and Balkans. The European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, E.U.S.S.R, emerges after World War II, fundamental reshaping the 20th and 21st centuries. This hypothetical entity, stretching from Poland to parts of Italy and down to Greece, bound by a new artificial language and a blended anthem, presents a dramatic departure from our timeline's Cold War. In this alternate reality, the immediate aftermath of World War II sees Soviet influence solidify not just in the historically constituted Eastern Bloc nations, but also extending to include Yugoslavia, maintaining its communist structure but within the U.S.S.R orbit, Albania, Greece, and significant parts of Northeast Italy and East Vienna. This vast, contiguous territory becomes the European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, E.U.S.S.R, a powerful, albeit junior, partner or closely connected state to the U.S.S.R. Formation and ideology. The U.S.S.R formation is driven by a potent mix of Soviet strategic goals and the local consolidation of communist power, perhaps facilitated by a stronger or differently focused Red Army push and more acquiescent or internal weaker opposition in the included non-historic Eastern Bloc territories. The official ideology is a unified form of communism, adapted to the European context, emphasizing pan-European socialist solidarity while remaining firmly aligned with Moscow's broader communist project. The blended anthem, marrying Beethoven's Ode to Joy with the Soviet anthem, symbolizes this intended synthesis of European cultural heritage and communist ideals, albeit under Soviet tutelage. Vienna, specifically the East Vienna sector as part of larger U.S. capital district. Vienna was historically a major European imperial capital and is geographically relatively central to the entire sprawling U.S. territory, connecting the northern and southern parts. If the Soviets maintained significant control or influence over Vienna through their occupation zone, elevating East Vienna and potentially integrating the whole city under U.S. control to the status of a U.S. capital would be a potent symbolic act, positioning the U.S. as the successor or new heart of unified communist Europe, replacing the old imperial and now divided Western order. The Esperanto experiment, a cornerstone of the U.S.'s internal policy, is the ambitious and, in this successful hypothetical, effective imposition of an artificial language, akin to Esperanto, as the lingua franca. This is a radical departure aimed at dissolving national linguistic barriers and fostering a singular U.S. identity above traditional national allegiances. While historically constructed languages have seen limited widespread adoption, in this timeline, the centralized, authoritarian power of a U.S. state apparatus, controlling education, media, and administration, successfully integrates this new language over a generation or two. Russian might remain an important language due to the close ties with the U.S., but the artificial language becomes the primary means of internal communication and administration within the U.S. Geopolitics and diplomatic relations. The emergence of the U.S. creates a starker, more geographically consolidated East-West divide in Europe from the outset. The Soviet Union, the U.S. remains the senior partner, likely exerting significant political and economic influence over the U.S. The U.S. serves as a crucial buffer zone, a vast pool of resources and manpower, and a projection of Soviet power deeper into Europe. However, the sheer size and diversity of the U.S. might also present administrative challenges for Moscow. Western powers, USA, UK, France, etc. The reaction from the Western allies is one of profound alarm and heightened tension. The Iron Curtain is drawn further west and south than in our timeline. The inclusion of Greece, a nation in our history that successfully resisted communist takeover, and parts of Italy, a founding member of NATO and the EC, is a major strategic loss for the West. This would likely accelerate and strengthen the resolve for Western European integration and military alliance, NATO. The Cold War would be even more fraught, with a larger, more immediate conventional threat in Europe. Former Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan. Post-war Germany would be even more acutely divided, with a larger and more significant East German state within the U.S. West Germany would be a frontline state, heavily reliant on Western support. Italy would be fractured, with its northeast absorbed into the U.S., creating a permanent point of tension and irritantism with the remaining Western-aligned Italy. Japan, under U.S. occupation, would remain firm in the Western sphere, its strategic importance amplified by the expanded communist bloc in Europe. Minor powers, neutral nations like Switzerland and Austria, what's left of it outside East Vienna, would face immense pressure and likely bolster their defenses and neutrality. Countries bordering the U.S. would live under constant geopolitical shadow. Psychological impact. The populations within the U.S. would experience a complex psychological reality. Initial resistance and suppression. There would likely be significant initial resistance, particularly in regions with no prior history of communist rule or strong national identities opposed to Soviet dominance. Greece, parts of Italy. This resistance would be met with the U.S.'s centralized and repressive security apparatus, leading to purges, surveillance, and suppression of dissent, similar to the historical Eastern Bloc but on a larger scale. Forced integration and new identity. The imposition of the artificial language and the promotion of unified U.S. identity would aim to erode national loyalties. For younger generations, generations growing up entirely within the U.S. system and educated in the new language, this engineered identity might take root, leading to a sense of belonging to this new, large entity. However, older generations would likely retain their original national and linguistic identities, creating a persistent underlying tension. Isolation from the West. The Iron Curtain would be a tangible reality, severely limiting contact and cultural exchange with Western Europe. This isolation would foster a distinct U.S. culture, shaped by the ruling ideology and the new common language, but also potentially leading to a sense of being cut off from broader European developments. Ideological landscape. The U.S. would present itself as the true Roman 11 and realization/achievement of European socialism, a countermodel to Western capitalism and integration. Propaganda would emphasize the equality and unity of the diverse peoples within the U.S. under the banner of communism and the new common language. This would pose a significant ideological challenge to the Western concept of Europe based on democratic nation-states and capitalist economies. Public reaction. Public reaction global would be sharply divided. In the West, the public would view the U.S. with fear and apprehension, seeing it as a direct threat to their security and way of life, and a communist sentiment would be even stronger. In the U.S. and allied communist states, state-controlled media would portray the U.S. as a triumph of socialism and a step towards a unified communist future for Europe. In the non-aligned world, reactions would vary, with some nations viewing the U.S. as a potential counterweight to Western influence, while others would beware of its size and ideological rigidity. Potential timeline and 21st century view. Late 20th century, the Cold War would be the defining feature, likely with a stronger focus on conventional military readiness in Europe. The U.S., with its larger population and industrial base, could pose a more significant economic and military challenge to the West than the historical Eastern Bloc. The space race and arms race would still occur, perhaps with even greater intensity. Internal dissent within the U.S. would likely be met with swift repression. The artificial language would gradually become more ingrained, particularly in urban areas and among younger generations. The concept of Western European Union, faced with the monolithic U.S. to the east, the impetus for Western European integration. The historical path to the EU would be incredibly strong. The need for economic cooperation and a unified front against the communist giant would likely lead to a faster and deeper integration among Western European nations. This Western European Union, WU, would be primarily focused on economic prosperity, democratic values, and collective security. NATO. The division of it would be a constant political issue for the WU. 21st century. The 21st century would open with a continued, possible simmering, Cold War. The U.S. might face increasing economic stagnation compared to the capitalist WU. The imposed language, while functional, might lack the cultural depth and evolution of natural languages, potentially leading to cultural disconnects or underground linguistic diversity. Information control would be a major challenge for the U.S. government in the age of the internet and global communication. The WU would likely be a prosperous and technologically advanced bloc, albeit living under the constant shadow of its large communist neighbor. Post-collapse scenario. Should the U.S. collapse, the aftermath would be incredibly complex and potentially volatile. National resurgence and conflict. The suppression of national identities and languages for decades would likely lead to a powerful resurgence of nationalism. This could result in significant internal conflicts and border disputes as various ethnic and national groups within the former U.S. seek independence and redraw boundaries. The integration of regions like Greece and parts of Italy into the U.S. would make their reintegration into their historical nation-states or the Western sphere a fraught process, potentially leading to irredentist claims and instability. Linguistic challenges. The widespread use of the artificial language would create a significant linguistic divide. There would be a push to revive national languages, but generations would have grown up primarily speaking the constructed tongue, leading to communication barriers and a complex linguistic landscape. Economic hardship. The transition from a central planned user economy to market economies in the successor states would be difficult, likely leading to widespread unemployment, inflation, and social unrest, mirroring and potentially exceeding the challenges faced by historical post-communist states. Geopolitical realignment. The collapse of the U.S. would dramatically alter the European geopolitical landscape. The WU would likely play a significant role in the economic and political rebuilding of the former U.S. territories, potentially expanding its membership eastward, but facing the immense challenge of integrating diverse and potentially unstable new members. The relationship between Russia, the successor state to the U.S., and the new independent nations of the former U.S. would be a major source of tension and diplomatic maneuvering. The legacy of the imposed language and unified identity would likely be a subject of historical debate and political contention for decades. In conclusion, the hypothetical European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, while a fascinating thought experiment, highlights the immense difficulties of forcibly unifying diverse populations under a single ideology and imposed culture. While its initial formation would create a formidable power bloc, the long-term success and stability of such an entity, particularly in the face of external opposition and internal national aspirations, would be highly questionable, likely culminating in a complex and potentially violent unraveling. The existence of a U.S. would undoubtedly have spurred a stronger and faster integration in Western Europe, creating a bipolar continent for the majority of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The crumbling colossus. The 21st century after the fall of the U.S. and thus the simultaneous or near simultaneous collapse of both the Soviet Union and the European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, U.S. marks a seismic shift in the 21st century, far exceeding the geopolitical changes seen in our timelines post-Cold War era. The disintegration of the U.S., a larger and more diverse entity than the historical Eastern Bloc, unleashes a cascade of consequences across political, social, and psychological landscapes. Geopolitics and diplomatic relations. The most immediate impact is a power vacuum across a vast swathe of Central and Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Emergence of new nation-states, the constituent republics and historical distinct regions of E.U.S.S.R, Poland, a unified Germany incorporating the former East, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, a fragmented Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece, and the former Italian Northeast rapid assert independence. This process is highly uneven and often violent. Border disputes and conflicts, decades of suppressed national identities, and the artificial redrawing of borders under the E.U.S.S.R lead to numerous territorial disputes. Regions with mixed populations or historical claims by neighboring states become flashpoints. The fragmentation of Yugoslavia, even more deeply integrated into the E.U.S.S.R in this timeline, is likely to be exceptional, brutal, and prolonged. The status of East Vienna and the former Italian Northeast are particularly contentious, leading to complex negotiations or even armed conflict with Austria and Italy respectively. Russia's diminished role. A weakened post-collapse Russia retains significant nuclear capabilities, but its conventional power and influence in Europe are drastically reduced compared to the U.S.S.R's legacy in our timeline. Russia's foreign policy is likely focused internal on managing its own transition and external on its immediate borders, where of further Western expansion. The Western European Union W.U. ascendant, the U, forged in the shadow of the U.S.S.R, finds its primary reason to be circumflexed or suddenly vanish. However, its strong institutions and economic integration position it to become the dominant force in the new European order. The W.U. faces the immense challenge and opportunity of integrating the new independent states. This process is complex, involving economic aid, political stabilization, and navigating the myriad of border disputes and ethnic tensions. The W.U. effectively becomes the central pole of stability and prosperity in Europe. NATO's evolving role. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the military bulwark against the U.S.S.R, also needs to redefine itself. Its focus shifts from containing a single large threat to managing regional instabilities, peacekeeping, and potentially intervening in conflicts arising from the U.S.S.R's collapse. Many of the new independent states eagerly seek NATO membership for security guarantees against potential Russian irredentism or internal threats. Global power shift. The bipolar world order is replaced by a more multipolar one. While the United States remains a superpower, its focus may shift more towards Asia. China's rise is a more prominent factor in this 21st century. Diplomatic relations. Diplomacy is dominated by the complex process of state building, border demarcation, and the integration of former U.S.S.R states into the international community. Recognition of new states. The international community, led by the W.U. and the U.S.S.R, works to recognize the new nations, often conditioning recognition on democratic reforms and respect for minority rights. Membership in international organizations. The new independent states seek membership in the U.N.S.S, Council of Europe, and eventually, the EU and NATO, signifying their alignment with the Western liberal order. Managing ethnic tensions. International diplomacy is heavily involved in mediating ethnic conflicts and protecting minority rights within the volatile former U.S.S.R territories. Relations with Russia. Diplomatic relations between the new states and Russia are likely strained, marked by historical grievances and ongoing disagreements over borders and influence. Psychological landscape. The psychological impact of the U.S.S.R's collapse on its former citizens is profound and multifaceted. Trauma and disillusionment. Generations have grown up under an authoritarian system with a fabricated identity. The collapse can lead to a sense of disorientation, disillusionment with the failed communist ideology, and trauma from the repressive past and subsequent conflicts. Resurgence of national identity. There is a powerful and often fervent reassertion of pre-U.S.S.R national identities and cultures. This can be a source of pride and unity, but also fuel exclusion and nationalism and hostility towards minority groups or neighboring states. Linguistic identity crisis. The widespread use of the artificial language creates a complex linguistic situation. There's a strong desire to revive national languages, but men, especially younger people, may be more proficient in the constructed tongue, leading to communication gaps and a sense of linguistic displacement. The artificial language may persist as a creole or in specific communities before eventual fading or evolving significantly. Economic anxiety and adaptation. The sudden shift to market economies brings economic hardship for men, leading to anxiety, social stratification, and a need to adapt to new economic realities. Generational divide. A significant psychological divide emerges between those who remember life before the U.S.S.R or under its earlier, more rigid phase, and younger generations who only knew the later U.S.S.R period and the subsequent chaos of collapse. Ideological shifts. The collapse of the U.S.S.R represents a major ideological victory for liberal democracy and capitalism. Triumph of liberal democracy. The narrative of the 21st century is initially dominated by the triumph of Western democratic values and free market economics as the former U.S.S.R states attempt to emulate the W.U. model. Rise of nationalism. While democracy is the stated goal, the vacuum left by the U.S.S.R's collapse is often filled by strong nationalist ideologies, sometimes with authoritarian tendencies, as nations grapple with their newfound independence and internal divisions. Legacy of communism. The experience of living under communist rule leaves a complex legacy. While the official ideology is widely rejected, aspects of social welfare or state control may be viewed with nostalgia by some, particularly those who struggle in the new economic order. The W.U. has an ideological pole. The W.U. serves as a powerful ideological pole, representing stability, prosperity, and democratic governance, attracting the aspirations of the former U.S.S.R states. Reaction of major and minor powers. Major powers W.U. U.S., Russia, China. The W.U. and U.S. are actively involved in the transition, providing aid, expertise, and security guarantees. Russia is primarily a concerned observer, seeking to maintain influence where possible and prevent hostile alliances on its borders. China views the collapse as an opportunity to expand its economic and political influence in the region. Minor powers. Neighboring states not part of the U.S., e.g., Turkey, Austria, what's left of it, residual evil, are directly impacted by the instability and refugee flows, but also see opportunities for increased trade and influence in the new opened territories. Public reaction. Public reaction across the globe is varied. In the West W.U., there is a sense of relief and vindication at the end of a communist threat, mixed with concern about the instability and potential for conflict in the former U.S. territories. Public opinion is generally supportive of providing aid and integrating the new democracies, though debates arise about the pace and cost of expansion. In the former U.S., public reaction is a mix of euphoria at liberation, anxiety about the future, anger at the former regime, and sometimes hostility towards ethnic minorities or neighbors. There is a strong desire for better life, often looking to the W.U. as a model. In Russia, public reaction is likely to be a mix of national humiliation at the loss of empire, economic hardship, and uncertainty about Russia's future role in the world. Global. The collapse is widely seen as a major historical event, a confirmation of a trajectory of history towards democracy and market economies by men, while others may view it with caution, recognizing the potential for instability. Timeline and view of the 21st century. Early 21st century, 2010s, dominated by the immediate aftermath of a collapsed state building, conflict resolution, economic transitions, and the initial waves of W.U. and NATO expansion eastward. This is a period of significant instability, but also hope for more unified and democratic Europe. Mid-21st century, 2020s, 2040s, the former U.S. states are in various stages of integration into the W.U. and NATO. Economic disparities within the expanded W.U. are a major challenge. The legacy of the artificial language persists, perhaps as a subject of academic study or in isolated communities. Russia attempts to reassert itself on the global stage. New geopolitical rivalries emerge. Late 21st century, 2050s onwards, Europe is largely integrated within a greatly expanded W.U., though internal tensions related to national identities, economic disparities, and the legacy of abuse remain. The conflicts of the early post-collapse period are historical events, studied and debated. The artificial language is likely extinct or confined to historical curiosity. The global order is shaped by interactions between the expanded W.U., a resurgent or stable Russia, China, and other global powers. The concept of European Union is synonymous with the expanded W.U., a testament to the power of voluntary integration in contrast to the failed forced unity of the U.S. The collapse of the U.S. in this alternate timeline creates a more dramatic and potentially more violent transition than the historical fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The sheer scale of the U.S. territory and the depth of its imposed control mean that its unraveling is a complex, protracted process with lasting consequences for the political map, social fabric, and collective memory of Europe. The 21st century in this world is defined by the challenging but ultimately successful in the W.U.'s case process of rebuilding and integrating a continent scarred by decades of artificial unity and its subsequent, often painful, disintegration. Well, if you enjoyed this serious scenario, leave a like and unsub. For more serious scenarios, or more silly ones, if you want to see more stuff, this is my secondary channel. I do most game stuff, so that's all. I hope you enjoyed.